Okay, welcome back. So, good morning, everybody. This is Occupational Health and Environmental Health in Occupational Environmental Health Engineering, KQD 7003 classes. Today, it's our second class today. We're going to discuss on occupational health law, environmental health law, and workers' compensation. All right. So there will be three section of this for this class today. So we start with occupational health law, then we followed by workers' compensation, then we would end with environmental health laws. All right. So it's important for you all, especially those who want to be working in DOSH or working as a occupational safety and health officer or SHO. Safety and health officer must basically understand the laws, not just the occupational part of it, but also the environmental part of it, because a lot of issues that arise from the environment are basically considered, and you need to read more, you need to understand more. I'm not going to cover everything about the law today. I'm just going to cover the basic concept. The details of the laws you need to read by yourself and understand it more clearly. So the issue, the thing that I'm going to discuss is basically for you to be able to understand how to read the law and why we have certain legislation and what is the reason for having certain legislation. All right. So good morning again. All right. So I am Professor Victor Ho. So me and Professor Dr. Mazuki Isaha will be your course tutors for the next 13 weeks. All right. So what do you see here? Basically, before the Industrial Revolution, before the start of everything, and agriculture is basically more towards traditional agriculture, where you farm for yourself, and extra that you get, you give it to your neighbors, or you sell it to the traveling merchant. So this is what is happening at the start of the last century, which is basically 1700, end of 1700. All right. So the issue is that when you are farming alone, when you are doing things alone, then you don't have to be worried about your things. So household workers set their own pace, all right, and did their work by hand, using simple machines like spinning wheels and weaving looms, produce only limited quality of merchandise. So this is where the start of it. Then came the Industrial Revolution. It started off in Great Britain or in Europe in from 1750 to 1850. All right. So what happened when the Industrial Revolution starts? All right. So a cultural economic shift from cottage industry and traditional agriculture and manual labor to system of factory-based manufacturing that included complex machinery, continuing technology growth, new energy source, and development in transportation. So what does this what is it got to do with laws? All right. So there are basically a lot of movement of people, all right, from the what we call from the village to the city to work because of the industrial revolution where they need more people. We also see children starting to work, all right, because they are cheap labor and because they basically contribute, and also because of their small hands, they are required in certain industry. So if you see this little bit of history, this is from the US. It says that the OSHA says apologetically, she was working steadily when the investigator found her. The mill seems full of youngsters who just happened in or are helping sister. So the idea is that during that time, basically you bring along your sister in water comma to help them to work. So that is where this is where the issue started, all right, during the early industrial revolution. So we have also boys working. These boys are cutters in a canning company. So we also have the youngsters working in the mines, all right. So young boys working in coal mines when often referred to as breaker boys. So these are from the US because I didn't find any nice picture from the UK, but the same thing happened in the US and in the UK. The only thing that in the UK it happens in the 1700, 1750 instead of the 1900. All right. So why am I discussing this, and why am I bringing this forward? Anyone want to give some ideas? It's open for discussion. All right, you can turn on the mic and maybe we can have some discussion. Why are we discussing this when we're talking about legislation? What's the issue do you think that comes into mind?
Workmen's compensation, Professor?
This is not workmen's compensation. This is to do with occupational health law.
Okay.
So why are we discussing this when we're talking about the occupational health law? What is the reason, do you think? Anyone? Anyone think about it? Think clearly. Think something about why are we saying all these things when we are discussing more about occupational health law? Why do I bring this the historical part of it? Of course, I basically later we talk about more about history of what happened in Malaysia, but we start off with history what happened in the UK because our legislation came from the UK, so we have both legislation that are legislated, and then there are also other kind of legislation that we're going to discuss later. The question now is why are we bringing this up, and why do you think that is important?
Protection.
Yes, please.
Protection.
Protection. I mean, why? What is it? It's not a one-word answer. You need some thought into it. What do you think? What do you think is it? What's important? What is important of bringing this up?
They are still children. They are vulnerable to occupational hazards.
Right. So the thing is that when industry starts, usually people are not clear of what is happening. All right. So they don't know what's danger and what's not danger. They don't know the limit of what a children is basically needs, and what kind of protection a child needs, or what kind of protection a worker needs. So who actually protects the people or the children? Who actually protect them? Does the company protect them? If the company is supposed to protect them, if the company employer does not protect them, the government needs to step in to protect them. So the issue is that because of the problem that is arise, and the issue of children working and working in an environment that is not conducive for children to work, that's why they need some legislation. So started off with legislation in UK is basically first act in which related to working condition is Health and Moral of Apprentices Act 1802. So you know what is apprentices? The apprentices are young people that comes to learn something, because last time there's no school. There's school, but schools are only for the rich people. All right. So the working class basically don't go to school, and they just work as apprentice, very young in their career, to learn the skills and then to basically develop their skills and be able to become adult and work in industry that basically they have learned the skill from. So it's different from what we are having now, where we have schools, we have primary school, secondary school, like university, or we have technical colleges. But during the early days, there's no such thing, so they start off with apprentices. So the issue that you need to come up with Apprentices Act to make sure that the apprentices are being taken care of, and they are not what we call being abused, or being used as a cheap labor. So there's the issues that was identified. So when the issue was identified, so they come up with the act. So the act stipulated that children in the cotton or woolen mills must have sufficient windows to ensure flow of fresh air. The walls and floors of the mills must be washed regularly. Separate bedroom must be provided for the two sexes. There must be no more than 2 children to a bed. 2 suits of clothing must be provided for each child, one to be new each year, or at least first 4 years of their apprenticeship, children must be instructed in reading, writing, and arithmetic. All right. Meals were to be whitewashed twice a year, but they did not set a minimum age for employment. Employers breaking this regulation must be subjected to a fine ranging between £2 and £5. Unfortunately, there was no inspector appointed to enforce the law. So this is what it started off with. Basically, it started off with looking at the environmental issue, looking at the local gender issue, all right, and also providing more like basic necessity for the children. So the idea is that they started off looking at, they identify some problem and then they come up with some solution. So a problem and a solution, all right. So that changes, they come up with another regulation of cotton mills and factories. No children under 9 were employed. Children 9 to 16 were limited to 12 hours of work per day. All right. So this is the regulation developed and basically get better, and because of more what we call information they collected and more problem they faced. So if you look at it earlier, we talked about there's no inspectorate. So in 1833, they started with the Factory Act, development of factory inspectorate, covered textile factories, excluding lace making. No children under 9 were working in factory. Children under 13 years old were to work no more than 9 hours per day or 48 hours per week. Under 18s were not to work at nights. 2 8-hour shifts per day for children were to be allowed. Okay, very interesting, correct? So factory inspectorate, no children under 9, more under. So a lot of the things is related to environmental issue, general condition of the factory, but also it's look at basically children, all right? So it's separate between children under 9, children 13, and children under 18. What's the problem with this type of act? What is the issue you think that you can identify? All right. Anyone can give me some ideas? Anyone? We need some communication, we need some discussion, so it will be better, because this is not a one-way conversation. This is not one-way teaching. This is basically a discussion because you are a master student. Right? Any ideas? Why? What's the problem with this act? What's the problem with the Factory Act? What's the problem with the Cotton Mill Act? What are the issues that you think the thing will face? Any question?
Sir,
Yes.
I think it's hard for them to comply to the act because some might say they are more than 9, some might say they are under 18. So it's not accordingly to the actual age of the person.
Why? Why do you think it's too difficult?
Mm, I'm not sure, sir.
What is correct? What you say is correct. But anyone else? If Fa says that because it's very difficult for you to know how old you are, so what? How do you know? How do I know how old you are, Ifa?
Maybe from the IC?
All right, from the IC. Very good. From the IC, or from the birth cert, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else know any other problem? Okay, let's move on. All right. Let's look at this same picture again. Correct? We saw this picture before. All right. How old are these boys? Anyone? By looking at their face, by looking at their stature, by looking at their
9?
height.
They're all definitely below 18. Lah.
Okay, below 18. But the issue is that can you from the height itself decide how old is the boys?
Cannot.
Because it depends on genetic, depends on nutrition, correct? There's issue of stunting. Stunting means that you don't grow as tall as you're supposed to grow because of your early nutrition that's not good. So so the idea is it's quite difficult for you to have an act, and then when there's no effective means, mechanism, and enforcement, all right, there's no means of actually knowing whether that it is due to what is the age of the children or of the worker. So how do you go about that? Of course, medically, we have way of doing it. Basically, this is the X-ray of the knee. All right. So by looking at the epiphysis, growth plate, metaphysis, so you will see the top part. The top part is your femur. This is your tibula. This is your fibula. All right. So in between this, there is a thin line of black. Okay. In between this, there's thin line of basically darkened shade. This actually is the growth plate. All right. So it wouldn't fuse. If it fuses at a certain time, and then it become then we can decide. So if we don't have, if we, this is one way basically that we can see how old is the person. All right. So just give you some ideas. Age of union of the epiphyseal plate of some long bones. Basically, what it means that when the union occur, you wouldn't see the epiphyseal line in between. All right. So these are some of the years that you can see. So you have, so when it's 18 means that they completed union. All right. So that's why 18 is important. Why is 18 important? Because during the union part, if you're subjected to any stress, any issue related to because if there's early union means the bone would not grow, and you basically will not achieve the height that you are supposed to grow. So that's why under 18 is very what we call important age. That's why for growth. That's why the issue of 18 years old is important in that context. So because of the growth plate being typically getting fuse together. When it fuse together, which means that the growth has stopped, you have reached your maximum height, so there's no issue. But before that, if you have not reached your maximum height, then if there any stress to your body, you might not be growing to the maximum height. So this is one way of basically looking at how to get the age. All right. So the thing is that to do that, of course, these are the mechanism. You will see that the act actually comes in quite early. All right. Later only they start to look at registration of birth, death, and marriage. So registration of birth, death, and marriage isn't there before that. So you don't have what we call birth certificate. All right. So the idea that you don't have birth certificate, so you wouldn't know how old the person is. Then after that, only 1844 they come up with certifying surgeon. So certifying surgeons are basically doctors, all right, they can certify the age of the person. So if you don't have registration of birth, death, or marriage, then you need to certify agent to basically certify your age. So there's another way of doing it. So after that, only they develop more and more act and more legislation to help to improve the health of the workplace. So the issue of when we talk about legislation, when we talk about law, we must focus on two main issues. There is a criteria. You set a criteria of what you want based on the evidence that you have at the point of time, and you also must have a mechanism of how to enforce and how to confirm those criteria. So if you see from early legislation coming out from the UK, you'll see that there are some limitation and there's some weaknesses to this old legislation because you have the criteria, but you don't have the mechanism. Sometimes the criteria is not really clear of why you have the criteria. So the main thing is that you need to understand why the criteria is being being brought into place, and then you will be able to understand and you would be able to communicate it more clearly with the people that's working under you. So that's important for you. The communication is important, and to have effective communication, you yourself must be able to understand why certain things are being done, so that you won't be, you are clear of what you're doing. All right. So that is in the UK. Now let's move back to Malaysia. All right. Okay, we're still in the UK now. All right, so there is a legislation for chimney sweeper. Okay, so when the needs arise, basically because of there's a finding by a person called prescriptive pot, all right, and found that when there's loss of soot, okay, soot is basically the black color after you burn coal, you get soot, all right, in the rugged of the scrotum, that means in between the scrotum, the chimney sweeper, you get scrotal cancer, also known as soot wart to those affected, all right. So then 1788 come out with the Act of Better Regulation of Chimney Sweeper and their apprentices. Then specify age, minimum age of 8 years and parental consent and acceptable living condition. So for chimney sweeper, if you look at it needs basically very young people because of the fact that the chimney are very, very small and you need very, very small people that will go in and sweep the chimney. So 1834, the Act of Better Regulation of Chimney Sweeper and Apprentices and for the safer construction of chimney and fuels. The middle age of apprentices raised to 10 years, and the Act introduced some regulation regarding the construction of chimneys and fuels. 1840, Act of Regulation Chimney Sweeper. This Act provided the raise the minimum age apprentices to 16 years old, further state that no people under 21 should sweep the chimney. And then 1864, the Act was amended and extended to Regulation Chimney Sweeper. 1875, Chimney Sweeper Act, an act that required chimney sweeper to be licensed and that the violation of previous act would result in loss of licensure. So if you look at this, the act, what you understand is the act can be evolving, correct? Legislation is evolving based on your latest evidence and also evolving based on the condition that you are facing in your country or in the world at a particular point of time. So it's not as is important. An act is not cast in stone, and it can be changed by if there is a new evidence that something is better, or you can do something better, so you can change it to improve it. So there's no such thing as we have done it before like this. Why can't we do it again? Basically, the act needs to be changed. This example of legislation of chimney sweeper, you show you that the act actually changes, and also the issue of why the act came into place is because of someone found that there is a risk of cancer in this group of people, and basically they fight for this group of people. So Percival Port is basically the very famous person who basically relate to scrotal cancer. So Malaysia, okay, so Malaysia, we have what we call the Indian Immigration Ordinance, the Chinese Agricultural Labourers Protection Ordinance, Selangor Steam Boiler Enactment, Machinery Enactment for Federal Malay States, Estate Labour Protection Enactment, Labour Code, Health Board Enactment, Rum Labour Code, Workmen's Compensation Act, Machinery Ordinance, and Employment Ordinance. So these are some of the acts that came into place before we attained what we call independence from the British in 1957. So most of the other acts, basically, if you look at it, is ordinance. Ordinance means that it comes from the order of the British Empire. All right, enactment also is almost the same thing. So it is not. It doesn't go through what we call Parliament. That's why it's called an ordinance or an enactment. But of course, if it goes through Parliament, also you can have an enactment and ordinance. But most of it is because it doesn't go through Malaysian Parliament, because Malaysian Parliament have not been set up at that point of time. All right. So let's look at why some of the act came into place in Malaysia. All right. So the Chinese Agricultural Labour Protection Ordinance in 1991. There's a lack of inspection of part of Chinese protectorate official resulted in the labourers being frequently beaten and otherwise ill-treated by the Chinese headmen and contractors in Europe. Chinese estate, they were also detained long after they had fulfilled their contract and being kept continually in debt. So this is why, basically, this is called forced labor. So to reduce forced labor, the Chinese Agricultural Labourers Protection Ordinance came into place. This thing, if you look at it clearly, it is still ongoing now. The problem is still existing currently in the world, and we have not come up with an act or legislation to protect all our workers. Basically, most of them are still in forced labor or still continuing in debt because they are debt. So what does this act actually say? This ordinance made provision for the adequate accommodation and medical attention for the coolies. The working period of 12 months contract was reduced to 330 days. with a 9-hour limit to each working day. Holidays will also set aside without loss of pay. So holidays means that if there's a Chinese holiday, basically they're given holiday off because these people are from China. So it's a Chinese Agricultural Laborers Protection Ordinance. So the idea is that issue is that when there is a problem, they come up with the Audit Act. When the problem, they come up with another ordinance. Same for what's happening on the safety aspect. So there's the boiler enactment. So we start out with Selangor boiler enactment. Why is there boiler enactment? Basically, a boiler enactment means it's a safety issue, where your boiler, because industry use a lot of boiler, all right, currently also industry use a lot of boiler. So basically, this boiler are prone for accident where safety issue, basically they just blow up, all right. So to ensure that the boiler are safe for the workers to work with, they come up with an enactment. So because during that period of time, the laws is basically state and not federal, because the federal have not set up yet. So and the state is different. That's why you have all these different state laws that says the Selangor boiler enactment, Perak boiler enactment, Pahang boiler enactment, and the Kesamaan boiler enactment. So all these enactments are brought into place to ensure that the boiler in this industry are basically safe. So the idea is that you must the thing when we discuss is the law is evolving based on the needs, and also if you want a law, you must have a legislation, you must have a criteria, and the criteria must be able to be fulfilled, and also you must have a means to basically ensure that you can legalize or legitimize or go and make sure that the people are actually following the criteria. These are some of the legislation after independence. Basically, we have Minimum Housing Act, we have Factory Machinery Act, Employment and Social Security Act, Pesticide Act, Atomic Energy Licensing Act, Petroleum Safety Measure Act, and Occupational Safety and Health Act. These are all legislation that's related to occupational safety and health. So we are going to focus on Factory Machinery Act and Occupational Health Safety and Health Act when we're discussing about occupation safety and health. So let's summarize. So of what we learned so far, as I mentioned, legislation are developed based on needs. Legislation that is developed should have the criteria and means to actually enforce the legislation. Any question before we move on to the OSHA and FMA? Any question? All right. Okay, so we'll just move on. All right. So what are the legal framework in Malaysia? All right. This legal framework are not just in Malaysia but also in other countries that is Commonwealth related. So the background picture is a parliament, correct? So how many times does the parliament sit per year? Maybe 4 times. All right. And only when the parliament sits, then we can have an act. The act can be enacted, the act can be changed, the act can be modified. So the idea is that what is an act? An act is basically the highest law, and it's basically what we call the Act of Parliament. Then there's a regulation, there's a code of practice, and there are guidelines. All right. So what is an act? An act is the main law enacted by the parliament. All right. So who sits in the parliament? Both ruling MPs and also opposition MPs. Right. So all MPs sit in the parliament. So it's important if you want your act, or if you want your act to be, if you want the country to run efficiently, it needs to elect a effective member of parliament. All right. So we know that under Malaysian's legal system, we have what we call member of parliament, and also we have ADUN, or member of your state assembly. All right. So state assembly will look at the state issue. Member of parliament will look at parliament issue. So what is the role of the member of parliament? Anyone tells me what is the role of MP? You elect MP every 4 years to 4 to 5 years, and then what are their roles as an MP beside cabinet member?
To bring rakyat issue to the parliament.
To bring rakyat issue to the parliament, yes, one thing. And anyone else?
To agree and enact on the laws and legislation.
All right, to agree and enact laws and legislation. Very good. Anyone else? Anyone else? Okay, so basically, both of you are correct. Is to bring the rakyat issue to discuss in the parliament and to enact law that for the parliament. But the main, yes, Ananda, you put up your hand.
Sorry, no, mistake.
No, you didn't put up your hand. All right, you can put up your hand. I can see your hand. All right, no worries because I have my one. So the act is the role of member of parliament is very simple. Basically, they are supposed to get the issue from their constituent and then they could bring it up to parliament. But the main issue is to set up to review and to approve any act. All right. So anything that we do in Malaysia, anything that the federal government do must be based on the act. All right. So everything that we do is based on act. All right. So every year we have what we call a budget, correct? So a budget, when it's tabled and it's approved, it becomes an act. So a budget also is an act that tells how much the money the government can spend, how much the money the government cannot spend, and what the government can spend within the scope of the budget. So if you need to spend more money, you need to go back to the parliament and you need to get more approval to basically spend more money. All right. So currently we have a problem that is being set. We might have a problem, but that's why you need approval from the parliament. So we have a issue of COVID-19, and we might not have enough money to basically to be given to everybody that is affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. So they need to go back to the parliament to get more money. They cannot just take money out without going back to the parliament because it's an act. You need have to have an act before you can use anything or before you can legalize or legalize or legitimize anything. All right. So after you have developed the act, so the ministry can come up with regulation. So act is important. That's why the wording of the act is very important, so that people cannot abuse it by developing regulation that can be abusive. So regulation is basically detailed enforcement of the act and is gazetted by the minister. So it's usually developed by the ministry, right? Even the act is developed by the ministry through consultative approach, all right? Then code of practice can be developed by industry itself or can be developed by the ministry, and also guideline. The issue is the act is basically legal and you have to follow. Regulation is a legal entity. You have to follow. You have to abide by regulation and by the act. And code of practice and guidelines, you don't have to abide by them, but you need to show that you have a better way of doing things than what is given to you. So code of practice basically give you a guide of how to do things and give you a guide of the minimum standard that they think is important. But if you have a better way of doing things, then go ahead. You don't have to follow the code of practice, but you need to prove that your better way of doing things is good. So you don't have to be so bogged down that because you are international company working for international company, and then the code of practice in Malaysia is different from the code of practice from international company, but the code in international company is much better. So you need to understand that code of practice and guideline, you don't have to abide by it, but you must be able to prove that you have a better way of doing things. All right. But for the act or regulation, you have to abide by it. So to develop a regulation is always based on one part of the act. All right. So it's important. It is looking at that. Okay. So the next thing we go into is the main legislation in OSH. All right. The main legislation in OSH is your Factory and Machinery Act, Occupational Safety and Health Act. Of course, both the act are basically enforced by Department of Occupational Safety and Health under the Ministry of Human Resources. All right. So both of these acts are basically enforced and developed by them, so human resources. All right. Okay. So next. All right. Sorry. All right. Human resources. Next. So we have other legislation that's also you need to read and to understand Pesticide Act if you're using pesticide, Atomic Energy License Act if you're using atomic energy, and Social Security Act for Social Security. All right. Who uses pesticide? Construction industry uses pesticide, correct?
Yes.
Why? Because they need to fog every time. All right. Farm uses pesticide. If you're working for a agriculture company, so for you all who's going to become SHO or safety health officer, you need to understand all these legal issue also. How about atomic energy licensing act? Who who do you think uses atomic energy?
Nuclear power plants.
We don't have nuclear power plants in Malaysia. We only have what you call that? We only have a research plant in
Quality
UK.
alarm to treat nuclear waste.
We don't have nuclear power plant. How can we treat nuclear waste? All right. Quality alarm is no. Quality alarm. Yes, maybe. All right. Anyone else? Where can you find nuclear waste? Where do you think
Clinical waste.
Hospital.
hospital? Okay, hospital have nuclear, have not sorry, atomic energy like your both you use for X-ray, all right, your CT scan, your and also when you use to treat cancer, all right. So radiotherapy to treat cancer. Okay. Anyone else? Anywhere else besides hospital? Anywhere else use atomic energy?
Power plant.
Power plant. Why?
I can't recall already, but some kind of waste from there.
All right. So waste. Okay. So waste from the power plant. Okay. Agreed. Waste from the power plant. You can have waste that is basically because you concentrate the waste, then you get some sort of norm that you have converted to T norm. Anyone knows what is norm and T norm? All right. Never mind. Anything else? Anywhere else?
University?
All right. University. Okay. Because of for research purposes. Yes. Very good. Anything else? Construction industry. They use atomic energy. Engineering company. They use atomic energy. They use it for NDT. What's NDT? NDT.
Non-destructive, yes.
Non-destructive testing. All right. So we'll go into that next time. Okay. NDT. All right. So let's move on. Let's discuss about FMA. All right. FMA 1967. So the issue of FMA is going to be abolished soon. All right. And all the things related to FMA will be going to be incorporated into OSHA. All right. So anything that is in FMA is going to be incorporated to OSHA soon. But this is just for you to understand FMA. All right. And a lot of the issues in FMA you as a SHO you need to be concerned about. So it's not just only affect factories because it's Factory and Machinery Act. It looks at both factory and also machine. All right. If your company uses machine that is basically legislated or regulated under FMA, then you have to comply with the FMA Act. Okay. So it looks at factory, okay, and it looks at also notification of diseases. All right. So what's the issue of it? It's prescriptive in nature. Approach is student checklist, stress on enforcement, coverage, manufacturing, construction, and mining and quarrying. All right. Basically, manufacturing, construction, mining, quarrying is basically on the factory component of it, but the machinery component it covers more than a bigger perspective. So it's either it's a prescriptive in nature. What do you mean by prescriptive in nature? If you look at what I have described earlier, most of the laws are basically prescriptive in nature. What do you mean by prescriptive in nature? Anyone? Anyone? You go to a doctor, correct? And the doctor gives you a prescription. What does that mean? There's a lot of people here, no? Can we have some discussion? What does that mean? What do you mean by prescriptive in nature?
Very specific.
Sorry?
Very specific.
Very specific. Very good. And when you go to okay, let's ask you. When you go and see a doctor, all right, and they give you a prescription, what is that inside the prescription?
My case,
medicine.
you treated my
Sorry?
case.
All right, so it give you medication, correct? It will tell you that what to do. Is it correct?
Yeah, instructions.
Okay, tell you what to do. Is it correct? So
Yes.
prescription means that I tell you what to do. Is it correct? So
Yes.
do you need to know what to do as a patient? Do you need to know? Do you need to know why you're doing it? You need to know. Are you going to? If you have the similar thing, are you going to do it? Are you going to follow the same prescription? Or are you going to go back to the doctor to see different prescription? All right. So prescriptive in nature means that you are given a prescription and you must follow the prescription. So what's the problem with when you talk about prescriptive in nature? What's the problem?
They will restrict some practice.
You need restrict some practice, okay. Any other thing?
It could be very
Some activity may not be covered.
All right, some activity may not be covered because it's prescriptive and you cannot think of all activities. Is it correct?
Yes.
All right, so prescriptive in nature. So the problem is, that's why you look at the earlier legislation, you notice that it is because of there's a problem, they come up with legislation. There's a problem, they come up with legislation. There's a problem, they come up with legislation. That's why prescriptive in nature. When I see a problem, I will tell you what to do to improve on the problem itself. So it's not an act. It's not act that you can basically decide for yourself what to do based on best practice. All right. So it's a prescription that you have to do it. Although if you have a better way of doing it, you still have to follow it because it is in the act itself. So it's based on checklists, based on enforcement. All right. It's to provide control for factories with respect to the matters relating to safety, health, and welfare. And the next thing is registration of all machineries and for the matters of connected therewith. So they need to register and inspect all machinery. So registration is done by OSHA, inspection also is done by OSHA, all right? So the Department of Occupational Safety and Health do the registration, Department of Safety and Occupational Safety and Health do the inspection and do the registration. Before OSHA was established, what was the entity in Ministry of Human Resources known as? DOSH was only established in 1994 or 1993. Before that, what is it known as? Anyone?
Jabatan Jentera.
Jabatan Jentera?
DOSH, right?
Now it's DOSH. Last time?
Jabatan Jentera.
Jabatan Jentera is what? Jabatan Jentera is the machinery department?
Yes.
All right. Okay. So it's based on the Act, correct? Basically, you have Factory and Machinery Act, you have Factory and you have Department of, you have the, I don't remember that, yeah. Jabatan Jentera, very good, all right? So, under the FMA, you have certain section, all right? And you talk about section in the law, all right? In the act, it's called section. In the regulation, it's just called regulation, all right? So you have the duties of occupier to maintain and safety of appliances, good working environment, protection from rain and wind, PPE, notification of industrial diseases, appointment of medical personnel as assessor to inquiry of related occupations. So it is basically, these are related to health issue. You must understand that we are focusing on health because this is occupational and environmental health in engineering. So these are the issues that is related to health in the act itself already. So that is there already. You need to have a safety appliances, all right? And you need to have good working environment. You need to have protection of the rain and wind, from PPE, notification of industrial diseases, appointment of medical personnel. All right. Okay, I just remember it's called factory department, all right? Because of the Factory and Machinery Act. So regulation under FMA, which is related to health, you have Safety, Health and Welfare, 1970, lead, 1984, asbestos, 1984, mineral dust, 1989, and noise exposure, 1989. Why do you think this came into place? The similar explanation I gave you earlier is based on needs, based on the issue that some medical practitioner or some researcher found out that there is lead poisoning among our workers, there's asbestos issue, there's arises the issue of mineral dust, and also the issue of noise exposure where you get hearing disorder. So that is where the regulation came into place. So usually when the area covered in the regulation is standard, action level, and PEL. Control measure, you have elimination, minimization, information, training and science, surveillance, exposure monitoring, ambient and biological sampling, medical examination, and others. So all these things are there inside each of the regulation. So they have a standard action level and PEL. PEL is permissible exposure limit. We discussed this when we talk about other things, all right? They have control measure, elimination, minimization, and information of training, surveillance, and other for record keeping. Right. Let's go and go through each of the regulation. All right, lead regulation, the standard, they have PEL, 150 microgram per meter cube. Action level, 75 microgram per meter cube. So surveillance is based on blood lead level, all right? So this standard PL and action level is based on environmental monitoring. So if you monitor the environment and you find that there is 150 microgram per meter cube or action level of 75 microgram per meter cube, then you need to take action. So the difference between permissible exposure limit and action level is that when the chemical or the substance is at the action level, you need to take action. You need to start the preventive measure. PL means that the maximum level that the person can be exposed to is your PL, permissible exposure limit. Beyond that, you're not supposed to expose to that level. All right. So it talks on blood sampling, how often it's supposed to take, like 6 months if you're exposed, 3 months previous blood level of how many, and monthly if there's previous blood level. Or those with more than 40 milligram must be notified 5 days between. These are basically information that is available, that is inside the act, but for you as a non-doctor, you don't have to remember this. It's basically just for you to understand there's different sampling based on the level and based on the exposure and based on the blood level, previous blood level. So if you are exposed to action level, basically within 30 days, you must do the blood level test. All right. So the idea is all exposed more than action level must do blood sampling for every 6 months. So what does that mean to your cost of what we call the cost of production? The cost of production will increase because you need to do blood sampling every 6 months. So the idea is that if you improve the safety and health of the workplace, you reduce the lead level to below 75 microgram per meter cube, you don't have to do 6 monthly monitoring of the blood lead, but then you don't have to basically increase the cost of your of your production. So it is important that you try to reduce the levels in the industry. So medical examination frequency baseline, yearly, or sign and symptom of lead intoxication. So this is important. This is important for you all to understand what's medical removal protection. All right. So medical removal protection means that the workers is removed from the workplace if the blood lead level is above certain what we call levels, because we want to protect the worker from further issue of exposure to lead and from having worse medical condition. All right. So when they are removed from the workplace, basically, because when you're removed from the workplace, the body actually can adapt and actually can reduce the blood lead level in the body, and that itself basically will improve the what we call the health of the worker. So after that, basically, then only they can go back to work, right? So it needs to be tested again to make sure that the blood lead level is below that before you can go back to work. These are all inside the regulation as a FMA lead exposure regulation. What it means that we as a doctor, we cannot do anything more than that or anything less than that, because the regulation actually says that, so we have to follow also. So medical removal protection, we need to do it when the blood lead level is 80 gram. All right. Of course, we remove pregnant and breastfeeding mothers also. So next one, we have asbestos process regulation, 1986. So what's asbestos? Asbestos is 6 types of fibers. It can be crocidolite, amosite, chrysotile, fibrous, anophyllite, thermolite, and actinolite. All right. So we're looking at 1 fiber per meter cube, TWA. All right, and personal monitoring at least 3 months once. Frequency of medical examination, pre-employment within 30 days of employee commence of work, and interval no more than 2 yearly. Content, they must basically do a chest x-ray, we must take history taking, lung function test, and medical removal is that when we see early state of asbestos induced diseases. Control measure, elimination, prohibition use of crocidolite. All right, there's the prohibition use of crocidolite. There's the blue asbestos. You cannot use the blue asbestos. All right. Minimization, engineering control or exhaust equipment, work practices, proper handling and labeling, prohibition of smoking. All right, because smoking has been found to increase the risk of getting asbestosis. Okay, of course, personal protective equipment and medical record keeping. So we have noise exposure regulation, 1989, standard action level 85 dBA, PL is 90 dBA, intermittent at any time 115 dBA, and impulsive noise at 140 dBA. All right. So we are looking at hearing impairment by doing your hearing test every year, and also looking at permanent standard threshold shift. So you're exposed to at action level, you basically need to do a test every year. All right. So exposure monitoring, medical auditory testing program, testing conducted by technicians, supervised by medical practitioner, preceded by quiet 14 hours, room with permitted background noise, using pure tone audiometry at 500, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 kilohertz. 500 megahertz and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 kilohertz. So how do we do it? Within 6 months of employment, 2 years once if it's between action level and PEL, right, yearly. And a permanent standard threshold shift, informed within 3 weeks and provided refit, retrain, and worker with PPE. Next, we have mineral dust regulation. So mineral dust. So what's a mineral dust? Mineral dust is any dust that you can generate from minerals. So we're talking about clay, coal, chrysobolite, graphite, kaolin, limestone, marble, mineral, wool, talc, quartz, and stromatolite. So talc, we basically focus on free of asbestos fiber. So there are talc with basically asbestos fiber, there are talc without free asbestos fiber. This we'll discuss in more detail when we're talking about toxicology. All right. So standard PL is free silica, respiratory cristobalite, respiratory quartz, and respiratory thermodite. These are all inside the FMA, so basically you need to remember, you don't need to remember, just need to refer back to the FMA. So the idea is that respiratory dust, what does it mean? Respiratory dust means that fraction of airborne dust collected on a filtering media during personal sampling, that means you need to do personal sampling and not environmental sampling, which penetrates through a size collector with the following characteristic. All right. So aromatic diameter is basically around. We are looking at airborne dust of respiratory dust of less than 10 micrometer. All right. So less than 10 micrometer is called a respiratory dust. So dust that's less than 10 micron is called respiratory dust because it can enter your bronchioles, alveoli, and alveoli. So this is your trachea, this is your bronchus, this is your bronchioles, all right? And at the end of it is this is your alveoli. So this is where is your sac, where your air sacs, where basically air exchange from the environment and your blood vessels are happening. It is your alveoli. So once if your alveoli is destroyed, then your air exchange cannot happen, and that is where you get breathlessness like that. So so the issue is that the particles that can actually enter this will basically cause you respiratory problem and might clog the alveoli, will make air exchange difficult, or might combine with the cells inside the alveoli can cause fibrosis. All right. So there's fibrotic and non-fibrotic pneumoconiosis. We will discuss this when we talk about occupational diseases. All right. So the main thing is that particle size is important because particle size means that if you're above 10 micron, it cannot enter the body. It will be stuck in your nostril because you have nostril. There's a lot of hair there. The hair will basically ensure that the particle does not enter the body. Again, this we'll discuss in more detail in both occupational disease and also in toxicology. Right. So they describe a method of exposure, personal monitoring, full shift for at least 7 hours, frequency 30 days, new changes in operation within 3 months from the day of the employment, commence work, every 6 months, action level or PL, every 3 months, more than PL. So these are just exposure. All right, so medical examination, also they have stated that within 3 months, 2-year ones, yearly and early stages of pneumoconiosis. All right, so pneumoconiosis basically is the changes in the lungs due to exposure to certain external substances like silicosis that can cause pneumoconiosis. Basically, it's some kind of permanent damage to the lung due to the silicosis, silica dust that can cause fibrosis inside of the lung. So you do chest X-ray, lung function test, full test for TB because we know that if you have silicosis, you are more prone for getting tuberculosis because of the damage to the lung. So the tubercular organism can actually be more easy for them to spread because in the damaged lung. Control measure, minimization, work practices, hygiene, keeping, cleaning, changing rooms and work lockers and warning sign, maintenance, inspection, examination and equipment, and also respiratory protection. All right, so we finish with the FMA. Any question on the FMA? All right. So FMA, you just need to understand FMA, but now we focus on OSHA. OSHA was enacted in 1994. We know that we have been working on the OSHA for a very long time. All right. We are going to update the OSHA. All right. We're going to update OSHA, and it's supposed to be updated in November. The new act is supposed to be tabled in November of this year in 2020. But looking at the current political situation, I don't think it will be tabled. So we've got to wait for another parliament sitting. So the new OSHA will be much more stringent. All right. The new OSHA will basically, from the last town hall that we have in 4 years ago, where they say that there will be a fine of around 50,000 for SHO if they don't follow the OSHA Act. So Occupational Safety Health Act 1994 is enacted and to complement FMA 1967, where there is any conflict between the OSHA and FMA, then OSHA would review. All right. So Occupational Health Act philosophy is different from what we have earlier, which is from prescriptive. That means we tell you what to do, and you just do it. But OSHA is changed. It has changes the philosophy from responsibility to ensure safety and health at the workplace lies with those who create the risk and those who work with the risk. So it stresses on self-regulation and workers' cooperation and participation. It covers all persons at work except on board ship and armed forces. Of course, it doesn't cover also domestic servant, right? So on board ship, armed forces and domestic servant, that doesn't cover that. So under the Act, there's many regulations. And the latest one is, of course, your Occupational Safety and Health Noise Regulation, 2019. So the FMA Noise Regulation is superseded by the Occupational Safety and Health Noise Regulation, 2019. We'll discuss in more detail about this, and they tell you what's the differences and tell you why the differences actually happen. Okay. So what's the difference between FMA and OSHA? FMA is limited to factories and also machineries. FMA is prescriptive. FMA is issued with enforcement. OSHA is basically cover most workplaces except on board ship, in armed forces, and also domestic servant. It's based on general principle, basically, that if you create the risk, you must ensure the safety and health of your workers and also of the visitors to your workplace. And it's based on self-regulation. Self-regulation means that you decide what to do and you just do it, but the principle is very simple, very simple, but the issue of being too simple is too difficult for people to understand. So sometimes simplicity is not really the right thing to do. So this is what the Act means. This is basically the preamble of the Act. This Act makes provision for securing the safety, health, and welfare of employees and protecting others, non-employees, against risk of safety and health in connection with activities at the workplace. So it's very simple. It tells you that you have to do this. It tells you that you have to secure safety, health, and welfare. Not just safety and health, safety, health, and welfare of employees. Why welfare? Welfare to do with your toilet, your things, that is your food, the pantry, so things like that you have to. And protect others. It's not just talking about workers, but also others, non-employees, against risk of safety and health in connection with the activities at workplace. So if you're now in University Malaya, you're considered as a non-employees, all right? So you're considered a student, but we still have to protect you under OSHA 1994. Its doctrine of self-regulation, the function of health and safety law is to provide a regulatory framework, that means a framework within which the industry could undertake the responsibility of safety, health at workplace. It's called self-regulation. That means an act is to create a framework. Why we create a framework instead of being a prescriptive law is because, as mentioned earlier, we cannot think of every single safety health issue. We cannot think of every single what we call industry. So when the act was enacted in 1994, we don't have what we call platform workers, correct? We don't have AI. We don't have machine learning. We don't have IR 4.0. It's not there anymore. So we're not there yet. But the law actually still is applicable to this group of people. So the laws actually say if you are a worker, you must ensure that safety and health of the worker is taken into place. Correct. It says on both contract and non-contract workers. It says on direct and indirect employers. So it's at the end of the day, it is there in the act already. So for all platform workers, for your Grab driver, Grab delivery man, the law actually has been designed and basically it's applicable, and you don't have to come out with a new law to look at, to regulate this group of workers. You don't have to. It's there already. All right. So it's based on Lost Rubin's report from 1972. This is basically a UK report. So as I mentioned earlier, our act is still based on UK. So the primary responsibility for doing something about the present level of occupational accident and diseases lies in those who create the risk and those who work with the risk. So the idea is that there is a role of government action, but this role should be predominantly We're concerned with influencing attitudes and creating a framework for a better health and safety regulation and action by the industry itself. So it's creating a framework, and those who create the risk and those who work with the risk must manage the risk. So government is to create a framework. Why? Because it is important, because then the industry will set the standard based on the framework. So what's the difference between FMA? Philosophy and guiding principle is coverage is high more on all workplaces except on board ship and in armed forces and of course your domestic servant. Concept of general liability, that means you are liable if you don't do anything, and enforcement method is different, it's more on self-regulation, and basically the law should basically come to audit you whether you have done it correctly or not. Application or economic activity includes civil servant and statutory authorities, except armed forces, merchant shipping, and the other one is your domestic servant, because domestic servant are not considered worker. The idea is domestic servant are considered. So concept of general liability lies in the duty of the employer, designer, manufacturer, employee, and basically next time we will include SHO or OHD. So all those people who is supposed to be certified by DOSH to work in a certified manner, their liability is also there. And general liability for SHO and OHD, basically these people is 50,000. All right. So general liability is 50,000. If you don't follow the concept, they teach you the thing to do, then you are liable for a fine of 50,000 on top of the fine that they give to the company. All right. General duties employer is to ensure safety, health, and welfare of all its employees. Correct. So how they do it? Provision and maintenance of plant and system at work, operation, handling, storage, and transportation plant and substances, information, instruction, training, and supervision, maintenance the means of access and egress. So these are the duties of the employer that the employer need to do. Right. Duties to formulate safety and health policy. So when you need to formulate safety and health policy as often as appropriate, revise a written statement in the general policy with respect to the safety and health at work. So actually, who formulate the safety and health policy? The safety and health committee. Who actually is the signatory to the safety and health policy? The CEO. All right. The chief executive officer should be the signatory. All right. Or the COO, chief operating officer, should be the signatory. So it must be the top management must be the signatory of the safety and health policy. Who is the signatory for the safety and health policy for Malaysia? Malaysia launched the safety and health policy in 2019. Who actually is the signatory for the safety and health policy for Malaysia? Anyone remember the launch of the safety and health policy for Malaysia? Occupational safety and health policy? Anyone remember that?
Not Department of Health.
Who is the signatory? It's basically the Prime Minister. In 2019, the Prime Minister launched the Occupational Safety and Health, all right, for the country. So there is the policy for the country. So you will Google it, you will find that the safety and health policy for the country is signed by the Prime Minister. And for your information, Department of Health is not part of the Occupational Safety and Health. All right. This Department of Occupational Safety and Health is the one that is doing it. Department of Health is under Ministry of Health. So Ministry of Health is not related to safety and health of the workers. So the safety and health of the workers is still under the Department of Occupational Safety and Health, is under the Ministry of Human Resources. So if you are a company, you need to come up with a safety and policy also. If a company have more than 5 people, you need to come up with a safety and health policy. All right. General duties of employers and self-employed person to a person other than the employees, basically to a visitor, not thereby expose the risk to their health and safety, give information of such aspect and manner in which the conduct is undertaking as might affect their safety and health. So not just to the employer, but also to the non-employees also. So it's either the issue is not just the duties is not just limited to the employer, but also now the duties also is also focused on general duties of designer, manufacturer, and supplier. So manufacturers, example, and also plant for use at work, must have a safe construction, testing, examination, information about use, research on elimination, mineralization, safe erection and installation. I think there's some weakness in this part of the act because we don't focus so much on it. We only focus on employer and employee, but a lot of the time we forget about the duties of the designer, manufacturer, and supplier. Many people will supply you the goods, supply you the chemical, supply you the machinery. They must make sure that all the safety and health issues are taken care of. They must supply you with a machine that is safe. All right. They must supply you with the chemical that is safe, and they will tell you how it is to be used safely. So that is what is this part of the act is about. It's there already, but we don't emphasize on that, and a lot of focus is not placed on that. So manufacturer. Okay, next. Sorry. So general duties of employees. Okay, now it's basically focused on employees. If you don't do something as employee, then you will basically be liable. So you must take reasonable care of safety, health, and environment of himself and others who may be affected by his or her mission, cooperate with employer and personnel in charge of the discharge of the duties and requirement of imposed of the act, wear PPE clothing, follow instruction, and do not interfere. So all these things are part of the employee's responsibility. If the employee doesn't do it, then the employee is liable. And liable is not just liable under the company, but liable under the act itself. Duty of employer, also do not charge the employee for things done provided in pursuant of the act or regulated or related regulation. That means if the employer provide you with a PPE, they cannot charge you. If you say that my PPE is not working and you want the PPE from the employer, they cannot charge you. They cannot discriminate you if you say that my PPE is not working and not going to work. They cannot discriminate you. They cannot discriminate you if you say that this workplace is not safe and I don't want to work now. I want to make sure the workplace is safe before I work. They cannot discriminate you. They cannot discriminate you because you are working. You are the part of the Occupational Health Committee. They cannot discriminate you. Under the law, they cannot discriminate you. If they do that, they are liable, and you can basically take action against them. Okay, so safety health organization, basically this focus on health. You have medical surveillance, you have safety health officer, safety health committee. So what's medical surveillance? Medical surveillance is basically a fundamental part of occupational health. The purpose is to survey, to detect and eliminate the underlying causes of such hazard and exposure for any discovered trend, and thus has a preventive focus. It can also be said that it is the analysis of health information to look for problems that may be occurring in the workplace that require targeted prevention. When is medical surveillance conducted? It's conducted when the case of illness has occurred. There may be a risk for injury to the health of a person below the age of 16, person exposed to hazard in the third schedule of the use regulation, third schedule of the act, and also second schedule of the use regulation, 2000. This is the third schedule of the act. You're exposed to this, you're exposed to silica, asbestos, raw cotton dust, lead, mercury, arsenic, phosphorus, carbon disulfide, benzene, organic phosphate, nitrous, fume, cadmium, beryllium, and pesticide. So if you're exposed to this, then you will basically need to do medical surveillance. You're also exposed to tar, pitch, bitumen, mineral oil, chromate, acid, chromate, bichromate, potassium, zinc, sodium, X-ray, ionizing particle, radium, other form of radioactive substances, or other form of radiant energy, or working in compressed air. Then you need to go into medical surveillance. Who works in compressed air? Anyone knows? What do you know by working in compressed air? Works in compressed air. Anyone know? Everybody know? All this we'll discuss further. But I just want to ask you whether what do you mean by working in compressed air? Divers, all right. Divers work in compressed air. All right.
Workers in tunneling.
Tunneling, yes, tunneling work in compressed air. Not the tunneling itself. Tunneling work, you don't work it, but if you want to repair, repair the what we call that, the the head of the tunneling machine, then you need to work under pressure. All right. So what under pressure is working under compressed air. That means it's more than atmospheric pressure. Tunneling you still do under atmospheric pressure if you are in tunnel, so you're not considered compressed air. Working in a confined space is not considered compressed air. Working in a confined space is different, but you also need to do medical surveillance for working in a confined space. All right. Use regulation, we have some chemicals that is there. All right. So the chemical is sometimes it's the same as the one in the what, but there are a lot of chemicals in there. All right. So these are some of the chemicals that are in use regulation. So these are chemicals. If you have these chemicals in your workplace, then the person need to do medical surveillance. So notification of incidents, accident incidents and diseases. So if you're an employer, you must notify accident, dangerous occurrence. What's dangerous occurrence? Occupational poisoning and occupational disease. So accident we know, something that have happened. Dangerous occurrence is like a near miss, but not all near miss you report, only near miss that is major dangerous, all right? Occupational poisoning, yes, you got to notify. Occupational disease, you also got to notify. So as a SHO. So when we talk about employer here means that if the employer hires SHO, they actually transfer the responsibility from the CEO to the SHO. So the SHO must report all these things. All right. So it's important that you notify because you are an SHO. Then the other one is medical practitioner. Medical practitioner, if I see a case and I think it's occupational disease, I must notify. If I see a case, I think it's occupational poisoning, I must notify. All right. Even though if I don't confirm it's occupational disease, I can notify. If I don't confirm it's occupational poisoning, I also can notify. That means on suspicion, I can notify. So there are lists of occupational disease, poisoning, occupational disease found in third schedule of the regulation. So all notification must be done within 7 days. All right. So now this is final part. Basically, we just discussed about the new occupational safety and health noise regulation. All right. So those people that have worked before with FMA regulation will basically need to understand about what's the new occupational safety and noise regulation. Those that have not worked before with FMA noise regulation, then you don't have to remember the noise regulation that has been was there in safety and health, but we just need to know what does the new regulation actually means. All right. So for the occupational safety health regulation applies to all workplaces covered under OSHA. Basically, there is what we call identification excessive noise. So there is a code of practice to actually have been published. Under the code of practice, there's a checklist. All right. Under the checklist is that every workplaces must fill in the checklist. If the workplaces is found to have one of the thing as present, then you go to do a noise monitoring. So identification excessive noise is basically using a checklist. All right. So you can find a checklist under the code of practice related for this act. So training of exposed worker. All right. Now the training of exposed worker is more stringent. It's basically more than 82 dBA. Why is 82 dBA? Because the PEL has been reduced to 85 dBA, and now the action level is 82 dBA. We'll explain more of this in our occupational disease section, or to tell you why we have reduced it from 85 to 82, and from 90 to 85 dBA. All right. Assessment of control of measure practical, yes. Information of noise control method, detail the information. Last time it's just general information. Now you need to detail the information. So changes in person responsible for certifying audiometry testing. Last time it's just medical practitioner. Now it must be an occupational health doctor registered under DOSH. Audiometry. All right. Noise exposure limit annually. All right. Submission 1 month from the date of testing. Screening questionnaire. Provide determine fitness or other factors to affected result. Basically, now last time you don't have a screening questionnaire for your audiometry test. We just do audiometry testing now. You need to do a screening questionnaire to see whether your noise exposure is due to other factors besides workplace exposure. So the frequency of testing is include 8,000 kilohertz. Interpretation by OHD for all audiometry testing. medical examination for mandatory for abnormal audiometry by OHT. So baseline within 3 months. Medical examination form provided. All right, so you must, all these things you must put in. Referral to be decided by OHT. Hearing disorder to be notified. Notification of hearing loss, hearing impairment, PTSD by OHT and employer. So if there's noise-induced hearing loss, you got to notify. If there's hearing impairment, you got to notify. If there's permanent standard tertial shift, you got to notify. So it's not just tertial shift, it's permanent standard tertial shift. All right. Penalty is 10,000 or imprisonment for a term of not exceeding 1 year or both. Time weighted average, the PEL is, as I mentioned, is from shift from 90 to 85 dBA. So maximum level is still the same, 115 dBA. Peak level is still the same, 140 dBA. But action level has been reduced from 85 to 82 dBA. And the exchange rate has been reduced, changed from 5 dBA to 3 dBA. These are information that you need, that is there, right? And we will explain more clearly, in more detail when we focus on occupational noise-induced hearing loss. All right. So registration audiometry testing center, yes. Audiometry testing program, detail or scope for employer, audiometry testing center, and occupational doctor. Changes in term, noise risk assessor. So personal hearing protection, noise exposure limit, and hearing protection zone. So there's not just warning sign, but hearing protection zone, which means that the area where you need to hear, you need to wear a hearing protector. All right. Penalties under OSHA, general penalties, 10,000 1 year imprisonment. General penalties means that those that did not follow the general issue, the one that we talked about earlier for the employer, employee, and workplace, so general liability. All right. But specific liability for employer is 50,000 or 2 years imprisonment, which is different from the FMA, which is 5,000. So all these things is going to change when the new act comes in. General liability will be 50,000. I think employer would be much more higher than that. All right. Employer will be 500,000. General liability will be 50,000. And general liability includes a competent person like SHO and also occupational health doctor. So these are some of the code of practice that is there in the developed by code of practice that has been developed by DOSH. All right. So you just go through it. So these are some of the guidelines developed by DOSH. Go through it. The information is available on DOSH website. So there are a lot of guidelines, a lot of code of practice. So there should be one that fit what you want to do. And if you don't know how to do it, just please go and look at the guideline. All right. Do we need to comply with COP? Not really. We don't need to comply with COP. Only, as I mentioned earlier, code of practice, you need to, the only thing that you need to comply with is your regulation and act. So if you can find a better way of doing it, then you don't have to comply with the code of practice. All right. So the question is, what are the legislation related to occupational safety and health in your country? Because we're talking about people from other countries. What is the current legislation of ensuring health and safety in the workplace? Why was OSHA 1994 necessary? I think I've answered that. Basically, why was OSHA 1994 necessary? Anyone? Why did we come up with OSHA 1994 when we already got FMA?
94 cover all the.
Not just factory related.
Yes, Call. Can you start first?
We cover all industry except the shipyard and the armed force.
Not shipyard lah.
Not the shipyard, the shipping.
Not shipyard lah. Shipyard is still covered lah. Okay. Firstly, it increase the coverage, correct?
Yes.
Second,
that one is cover the employer and employee lah for this 94, and FMA not mention much about that.
one more. There's one more. Important one that I mentioned earlier.
Self-regulation?
Yes, self-regulation. All right. So it's based on self-regulation that we don't tell you what to do, but because it's based on general principle, is that we tell you that you need to do this. You need to ensure safety, health, and welfare, of all people in your workplace. How you do it is up to you. All right. It's called general principle. If you look at FMA last time, it's very prescriptive. We tell you exactly what to do. Exactly what to do. There'll be you don't need to know. So why did we move from FMA to OSHA? There's two reasons. All right. We started off with FMA because the time was very young. The industry sector in Malaysia is very young. So to train everybody to know what to do is very difficult. So now basically after many years, the industry is basically have grown, and now as an industry, you should know what you have to do instead of the government telling you what to do. All right. The main thing is just that you must follow the general principle of ensuring safety, health, environment in the workplace. Okay. Thank you very much. This is the first part. We still got 2 more parts to go. Can I have 5 minutes? Then you can come back. All right.